To kick it off, I think if most folks have planned on attending, they'd be here. So I'll do just a quick introduction. My name is Robert Gerner. I'm Enterprise Account Manager for AirWatch. I'm actually based out of San Jose, so not too far from here. Today we're going to talk about really specifically mobility. We've all heard of that four-letter acronym BYOD and some of the initiatives that we're kind of seeing specifically within the government space. And we will give you a decent overview as far as the product and some of the key things that we cover. It's been really interesting over this last year or so to see conversations really morph from basic MDM capabilities to more specifically around application development, how do we do security at the application level, and then also distributing and managing content specifically to devices. So I'm actually a firm believer in not killing folks by PowerPoint, so we'll get through a few slides, more positioning slides for you to kind of understand how we fit in the market, our company specifically. And then I'll actually go through a device enrollment. Assuming the Wi-Fi connectivity holds up, we'll actually show you how to enroll a device. I'll flip into the console and we'll kind of hit some of the heavy points. Before I go into that, since the room is manageable, maybe if I can poll whoever wants to volunteer, specific things around mobility that you're most concerned with, whether it's apps, whether it's BYOD, maybe if we can start over here, and then that way if I hear certain things resonate, I can kind of focus on those for you. Enterprise solution, so back-end integration points and how do we, leverage the internal infrastructure to streamline the rollout process. Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. Application development. Got it. Apps. Security. Okay. All right. Perfect. So good topics. I'll go through these slides and we'll start to hit those hot points for you. So there's a lot of people who say they do mobility in some fashion. Obviously, there's a room full of them downstairs. This market's changing extremely fast, so it's really important that you partner with the right provider, essentially, that really can innovate with the pace of this market. So every, I think, 30 days, you've got a new flavor of operating system. You've got a new smartphones, essentially a new tablet. So size and scale really does matter. We've got 6,000 customers. We're in 150 different countries. We support multiple languages, and we're close to 1,200 employees today. I'm sure you've seen the who's who as far as the Gartner reports. Essentially, that's usually where most folks start. The latest 2012 Critical Capabilities Report is the most up-to-date report as far as the market, kind of the who's who, really dives into kind of your 8 to 10 different core functionalities that are really key for picking an MDM platform. From the standpoint, these are kind of the who's who. We typically see, as you notice, we've really pushed really hard from an innovation standpoint to be that top level player for you guys. We are positioning ourselves to really not just be MDM. That's kind of our core framework. We're much more of a security platform. So now we're looking at security always best in layers. How do we secure provision at the device level? How do we then secure applications and content and other access points on the device? Just across verticals, just to let you know, we've got some huge deployments, 100,000 plus. We really do have the largest deployments of MDM in the market. You look at Coca-Cola, Pepsi scaling to north of 100,000, Lowe's, Home Depot over 50,000. Lowe's is actually Apple's largest corporate customer. So from an iOS perspective, we definitely know exactly how to manage those devices very, very effectively. We see huge deployments in education, and across these verticals, you'll look at folks like Shell and Chevron, some of these larger scale oil conglomerates, working with a lot of state and local agencies. It's become somewhat of a de facto standard for certificate authentication for devices, whether it's for Wi-Fi, VPN. So when you think of enterprise, the ability to integrate into your PKI infrastructure or an internal CA and do lifecycle management of those certificates for you. When you look at government, and I'll show you a snapshot of some of our state and local accounts, I know the California Department of Veteran Affairs uses us today. Actually, the Department of Veteran Affairs is going to be consolidating across all offices with AirWatch, so that's a big win for us. We're deployed at NASA, FAA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The NSA has been testing our software out for about a year and a half in their labs. So from a security perspective, we've definitely been vetted by a lot of these larger agencies. Some notable snapshots. We can always definitely get you in touch with reference accounts. We've got a dedicated team, so really the story here is we really do understand a lot of the use cases that you guys are running into. And the good news is we've worked with a lot of these agencies, a lot of these enterprises to already vet functionality to support that first one, that first two phase as far as use case. And the good news is we've got a lot of stuff in here that probably will become useful as you start to grow that footprint internally. Again, size and scale, really important. I think the big differentiator there is 350 people in product development. So BYOD, for me, working with customers like yourself, is a learning experience, especially when you start to think about supporting Android devices, for example. If you're not supporting Samsung Safe, which is the most enterprise-grade level type device on the Android side, you're then dealing with the fact that there are 39 licensees of Android, there are 3,600 flavors of Android, all of which operate differently. So how do you go about making sure you have a policy and secure those devices through a central system? We have those expertise, but the fact that we have these developers to kind of keep up with the latest and greatest and literally plug and play to turning something on or off essentially the same day it's available is really, really important. BYOD, kind of it's almost, you know, it's been thrown out there quite a bit, but it is something that is very important to folks. The ability to potentially set different privacy settings so that if I have a personal application on my device, I can still have it managed, but still have some privacy for those specific applications. Security can still make sure that those apps aren't malicious apps, so they're not malware, but not necessarily display certain types of data, so you're still giving them some creative rights on what technically is their own device. Flexibility of choice, so we support iOS, Android, Mac OS X, so MacBooks, Windows Phone. We can also centrally manage your RIM devices, and also Symbian, because we do have some global customers. We'll talk more about this stuff as we actually get in the console. 2 more slides. This really just gives you a snapshot of our overall stack, your focus really being enterprise, and then a lot of folks talking about applications. When you look at the security framework, we've got a component called our Enterprise Integration Service, which basically plug and plays into your back-end infrastructure, helps us to do things like directory services, authentication, lifecycle management of certificates. We can also plug and play into ticketing systems like a Remedy, for example, and automate some dispositions based on devices being quote-unquote not compliant. Also tying to things like SCCM, your VPN infrastructure. So again, really looking at what you've already invested in and making that more valuable and leveraging that infrastructure so that we can actually deploy this a lot more seamlessly across the organization. MDM at its core, our big focus really on application and content management, email management. We've added some file encryption and attachment management capabilities, which we'll talk about, and on the very top, reporting and analytics. I think the big thing that separates us just in general and what most larger state agencies want is multi-tenancy, and they also want the ability to have flexibility as far as what they can plug into from an infrastructure standpoint. I just mentioned multi-tenancy, and I think this is one of the big things, especially for this segment, that I think resonates really well. The fact is one size doesn't fit all, and that's down to the application level, where you might have some users needing only certain types of apps based on maybe their role or potentially the ownership of the device. It could very well be based on just different departments, and those departments essentially need to be treated differently, have different network access points, potentially be branded differently as far as the applications that you give them. We have the ability to actually have different device groups within the system and actually treat those with their own policies, their own configurations, etc. So literally one deployment with the ability to have customization all the way down to individual groups of devices. The last slide here is Secure Email Gateway. So a lot of questions around, do you work with 365 and Exchange? Yes, we do. We leverage PowerShell commands for doing whitelisting and blacklisting to PowerShell to the 365 or in-cloud environment. We also sit in front of ActiveSync essentially and act as kind of a quote-unquote traffic cop. So you can whitelist, blacklist devices, or say yes, no on acceptance to email based on is the device managed or unmanaged, is it jailbroker rooted, is the passcode enabled, is the device encryption enabled, are there certain levels of inactivity? So if for some reason we haven't been able to see this device in 90 days, we probably going to say no until we figure out exactly why, and then all the way down to device type, operating system, native email client, and so forth. So that's the slide presentation. I'll actually flip into the console here in a second, and I'm going to go ahead and actually do a quick device enrollment. Has anyone ever seen a device enrolled into MDM by chance? All right. I planted you. All right. Bear with me. All right. When that doesn't work, I use my... So bear with me. All right, so this is basically my personal tablet. So when you think of personal or corporate issued devices, that multi-tenancy again, completely different ways that you handle essentially that device based on who owns the device itself. That's going to be required to have customization all the way down to the terms of use. Again, my privacy statements and the terms of use for a BYOD device versus a corporate issue probably be very different. I'll show a couple things to you. I have my personal apps here. I've teed up the AirWatch agent, which is available on the public market. The email that I have actually configured is actually my own personal Gmail account. So these are my personal files. The device has native applications like your camera, your FaceTime, your photo booth capabilities. I'm pointing those out because through this process I'm actually going to restrict those. You don't have to restrict them, but this just shows you that there's certain things on the device essentially you can turn off. If there were profiles on this device, you'd see a profile section here at the very bottom. So again, no profiles, untouched. I'll go ahead and go through a quick enrollment. So typically the process usually is you would click on the agent essentially, you would enter in a URL. So that URL really is just a pointer back to where we've deployed the cluster for you. It then asks you for a group ID. This is actually a step that you could bypass, but it's a pretty important concept. If you think about, for example, our executive group or our VIPs, this ties back to that multi-tenancy, which allows us to figure out exactly how we want to provision this device. So we'll go through executives. Any folks here supporting or planning on supporting SAML or single sign-on? Anyone? No, not so much? Okay, so we do two-factor authentication, single sign-on, SAML. This is directory services integration. We can also do token-based authentication. So multiple ways to obviously make sure that you've got security as far as them authenticating and getting enrolled into the actual system itself. This is where you'd be prompted for that terms of use. If legal was in here, one important thing that you are able to do with our system is essentially if your policy changes 6 months later, you can actually re-update acceptance and have a full audit trail of making sure that they've got updated acceptance to that new policy. A lot of systems don't have that, obviously important. This is going to push out an MDM profile, which basically authenticates and encrypts all of the data going to this device and our system. So again, once the actual device is enrolled, we encrypt all of the data in transit and at rest. You'll notice the camera, the photo booth, and the FaceTime just disappeared. So they're no longer available on the device as just part of the restrictions. We can also geofence restrictions. So if you have a facility that you don't want a camera capability, being able to have access to it within a mile of that facility. Same thing with documents and things like that. We also have the ability to do time-based profiles. So if you have contract workers where you want a device to operate between 8 and 5 a certain way, we can do that. Outside of those hours, it's essentially just their normal device. We also have a check-in, check-out agent in the application. So if you have docked devices like this, where people can actually log in and check out a device, it'll automatically populate it for everything that they need. When they check the device back in, it basically rewipes the device. We see that a lot with healthcare, okay? So you'll see some applications pushing out. I'll kind of walk you through some of these apps and talk high level, and then we can jump into the UI briefly. If you noticed before, there were no profiles down here at the bottom, and now we've actually provisioned in that very short period of time 12 different profiles, restrictions, wireless LAN, app catalog, self-service, a passcode requirement. There was no passcode on this device, so therefore there was no device level encryption, exchange, VPN certificate, you name it. My passcode requirement, just on time. This could be as painful as you want, 16 digits, alphanumeric, change every 30 days, can't use previous passcodes, it's up to you. Once I've entered that, again, I've forced device level encryption. And there's a few other things just kind of continuing to push out. So very simple process. We're actually streamlining this process where all you need is your directory services, credentials, and your email, and it'll automatically pre-populate everything else based on our tie-in to directory services and what you should or shouldn't have access to. The last application that's actually downloading here is our secure browser. So I'll kind of go through some of the use applications here that we push out and support. Self-service, you actually have the ability for end users to actually manage their own devices. And I'll push this back in. So go through their self-service. If you've got a rule, for example, that says they can only have up to 2 devices, they can actually go into their self-service and kind of swap devices out if you deem them the ability to do so. We also have the ability to do some of the basic requirements for management through your self-service. For example, clearing a passcode, right? Instead of having to call help desk, they can actually go and clear a passcode. Simple stuff. When you look at the secure browser, we typically see the secure browser as more of a complement to the native browser. And what that, re-enter it here. Essentially what we can do with this, yeah, my internet connection's failing. So essentially what this can be done is, it's a complement to Safari, push your intranet sites, your recommended organizational sites. We've also added functionality through our enterprise integration service that this now can be used as a secure tunnel back into the network. So when you talk about applications, if I don't want to kick in VPN at the device level, essentially I could have these internal apps use that as a secure channel back to the internal network versus having to log into VPN separately, or we can use our SDK to do VPN at the actual application level itself. That tunneling capability will also be applicable to the content locker and a few other applications that you have access to. So different ways to make sure that wherever that data is being accessed, that it's done in a secure fashion. SharePoint web clip, we can tie that into a VPN on-demand component. The last thing I'll show you here on the device is actually our content locker capability. And this is a separately encrypted sandbox container, AES 256, and it's going through FIPS compliance right now. It's a repository for any of your sensitive documents, and essentially there's different ways to put documents in here. So we developed this a few years ago. We developed the complete opposite of your Dropbox in your box, where essentially everything was focused on collaboration of documents. DLP in the sense that literally you're locking down anything that they're viewing in this application. They can't do anything outside of it, right? Where we're going though is we're adding additional collaborative capabilities. So now we have the ability to have a personal content section where you can drag and drop data into your own self-service, which would then populate here. We also have a desktop sync, so we can now sync documents from the device to your desktop and so forth. We're also providing editing capabilities, first phase annotation on PDFs, and also shared folders. So I could say this room is going to be a collaborative workspace. Everybody on this side of the room has read-only. Everyone on this side of the room essentially has co-ownership of that file space, ability to edit, and so forth. So really kind of meeting the collaborative functions in the middle, but still providing security as a best practice. The original use case that we developed this for was for United Airlines. I think we have 8 of the top 10 airlines. Electronic flight manuals, so essentially tablets with this container so that they can access documents and so forth on demand, obviously when they're in air. So you could think of the use case where you might essentially have to pull up sensitive information within a 1,000-page manual very, very fast. So search capabilities as far as keywords, metadata, and so forth, very, very flexible. Any questions on the content components? Are you guys seeing more demand for access to sensitive documents on mobile devices? For the most part, yes? Yeah, okay. So the one thing I do like about our system is it's not SharePoint reliant. So not everybody has SharePoint, not everybody necessarily likes SharePoint. So we really support pretty much any file system, network shares, Windows CIF file servers. We also support pretty much anything that has WebDAV capability, so we can integrate through our APIs and support that. So essentially these repositories or these folders that you have here at the bottom, you'll see SharePoint will tie into your ACLs, your access control lists. So whatever they should have access to, that's all they have visibility to actually on the device itself, okay? And let me flip over to console real quick, and I'll go through some high-level stuff for you. Sorry for having to switch over. All right. So this is our fully HTML5 based GUI interface, and I'll just do a quick refresh here. These are all essentially active portlets that you can dive into at a deeper level, whatever you're trying to basically get additional forensics on. It could be based on device ownership, platforms, device compliance, so whether the encryption is enabled, passcodes on there, and so forth. These are going to be canned views, and again, sorry, the Wi-Fi is a little slow. These are all canned views. Where we're going with it is we've added this hub capability. So we're basically going to take the data, provide you maybe a list of 6, 7, or 8 different views. You'll see enrollment, so you can see how many devices essentially have enrolled during that week or that 1-month period, the breakdown of those devices that have enrolled, any compliance violations, profiles that have pushed out, any applications, and make this more of a graphical interface that you can then customize. So you have some canned views and then some customized views based on kind of what's important to you. As far as the console is concerned, this is a central management tool for all of those operating systems. So it's a single pane of glass that allows you to go in here and pull over 100 out-of-the-box reports. Obviously, you know, subscribe to those, so essentially you're not living within the system. Manage all of your applications. So we actually have an app catalog capability that pushes out to the device and gives you a central location for all of your apps, internal, public, pre-purchased applications, so that you can actually on-demand download those, and also provide the ability to have your users provide reviews and feedback on those applications. It acts as basically a custom app store for your organization, and again, because of that multi-tenancy, that group ID concept, what shows up in those app stores, what shows up in that content locker, what internet sites that are automatically bookmarked on your secure browser, all of that stuff's going to be custom to you and your role within the organization. So a lot of flexibility there. Content management, we'll talk about a couple key things as far as profiles. Before I do that, I do want to show you at a device level. Let's see here. So this is actually the device that I just enrolled. So if you look at the individual device, it's still proliferating information as far as the device health, security, profiles, passcode, the apps that are installed on it, your network information, UDID, serial numbers. If there are any compliance issues, we'd see those listed here. All of the profiles essentially that have been pushed down to the device, you can actually manage the profiles at a bulk or individual profile level. I always think of myself as a user, so when you think of the ability to travel from one location to the next, be able to push out optional profiles, maybe through your self-service for Wi-Fi settings, things like that. Different applications, any apps that have been listed on the device, and again, we can set privacy settings for personal information. Again, just manage them from the perspective of making sure they're not malware or malicious, but not necessarily displaying what they are from an admin perspective. Any content or documents that have been pushed out and secured through the content locker. Any of the certificates that you've pushed to the device. So one question I would have for the folks in the room, who here uses certificates for authentication purposes? Anybody? Interesting, okay. One of the things to note here is we do lifecycle management certificates. It's not simple SCEP. There's some pretty big use cases there, just an FYI, but full lifecycle management, so you're not managing those outside of the system. Basic user information, if there were multiple devices that were registered to me as a user within the organization, you'd see those listed here. So as an admin, you can actually dive into those. GPS capabilities, so again, we can do things like breadcrumbing, we can do things like geofencing. This right here, we've actually set, so we've designated this as a BYOD device, so it actually restricts it based on the privacy settings that we've put in the system. So again, as a user, I can go into my console and actually see GPS, but as an admin, I can't. So again, kind of going away from Big Brother's watching on a personal device, but still having security on the back end as your best practice. Full event log. So I've heard a few people come by today and talk about e-discovery on devices and the ability to potentially, need to find specific data and stuff like that. We have full audit trails of everything that goes on at the device as well as the admin level. Resync the device, remote view. This is more for Windows ruggedized devices, set roaming, so if expense management is a concern for you. Enterprise versus full wipe. So the big thing with BYOD essentially is the ability to wipe just the corporate related information and not their personal information. So that would be an enterprise wipe. So everything we provision to the device, we can manage, monitor, and potentially delete. Lock it, send it a message, SMS, email, push notification, clear passcodes, etc. So some of the basic at device level capabilities. Let me go ahead and log into my self-service to show you this real quick, and then I'll show you profiles and our compliance engine. We can open it up for questions and key on specific things. So how do we build profiles, or how do we provision those payloads to the device? It's through the profile section here. Essentially, they're XML payloads that we configure. I'm not the most technical. Probably everyone in this room is probably more technical than I am, but I can fly through the system pretty well. It's pretty intuitive as far as how you build out the different profiles based on the operating systems. If you've ever seen the Apple configuration utility, very similar to that, except it's not one-to-one, it's one-to-many, it's across operating systems. So when you build them out, you create a general header tab. You click deployment options, maybe minimum operating system types. Where this has been a benefit most recently is operating systems that might mess with your Exchange settings, especially calendaring. I don't know if anyone's running that issue. But the ability to select one flavor of operating system and basically build profiles around that flavor. Allow, disallow removal, again, geofencing, time-based schedules. And then once you've created this header tab, essentially just provision the payload that you want to push out. So we saw a passcode provision, enable a passcode, minimum lengths, all the way down to the number of failed attempts before it does an automatic wipe, for example. Any restrictions? So we actually restricted the camera capability and a few other things, the photo booth. Basically click on or toggle on and off all the way down to iCloud backups, force encrypted backups, etc. The last one I'll show you here, I'll show you two more. VPN's a big one along with ActiveSync. Security types, so really the who's who as far as your F5, your Juniper, your Cisco, and Equinix. If it's not on there, we just create a custom SSL connection. So automatically provision this profile to the device so the user doesn't have to do anything. You can tie this with any Connect application and an authentication certificate. So you then can create a list of applications that you would want VPN to be on. So essentially, as soon as they click on those applications, the VPN client on the device level would kick in. ActiveSync, so one of the things that we do well is directory services integration. So basically being able to pull real-time information from the directory services. So essentially when we're pushing out profiles, you're not manually inputting information. Also based on privileges, say for myself, I get promoted, I'm now an executive, I should have different access points or new applications. Those will actually automatically provision and push out to me based on my user group role change in directory services. We also do lookup fields versus hard coding, so we're not creating a complete dupe of your database. That's not really security best practice. It's hard to maintain as well. So the concept of lookup fields is definitely a big differentiator for us. Prevent moving messages, prevent pulling contacts from third-party applications. So if you open up Facebook for the first time, it tries to pull your corporate contacts. We can disallow things like that. We can also do file attachment encryption and management. So if you have 2 email accounts on your device and you get an attachment in your corporate exchange account, for example, we would encrypt it. It's device level certificate authentication, so it's only readable on that device. And when you click on it, it's open in only in the secure content locker, where then again we can shrink wrap DLP. So from an attachment standpoint, literally the only way to view it would be on this device in the secure content locker, and again that's separately encrypted. So a lot of different use cases we've started to vet out. We've seen that one quite a bit, both at the state and local level, but also within healthcare. So payloads, pretty simple concept. Literally just create a header tab and provision the individual payload out to the device. The last thing I'll show you here before I go into applications, because it sounds like there's a few people in the room that are focused on the app side of things, is our compliance engine. So the one thing I would get from most of my conversations with folks like yourself is, for the most part, everyone's short-staffed. The last thing they want to do is manage the system by living in the system. So I think this next thing that I'll show you is probably one of the more compelling reasons why we have so many enterprise-sized clients. 6 to 8 months ago, our disposition is essentially, so you enroll your device, you get presented with a custom terms of use. 9 times out of 10, you're probably not going to read that terms of use before you go through that process. So essentially, you have the opportunity to do something that is quote-unquote uncompliant on the device and not necessarily know it, and the only way that you will know it is your device becomes white, right? So it's more of a black and white disposition, okay? The way that we've gone, and I think it fits best with BYOD, is more of a way to manage behavioral change and educate the user, but still keep security top of mind. So let's look at the example of, so they've got encryption here, we've got SIM card changes, roaming, passcode requirements, a pretty long list. We'll look at a really simple one. We've created a blacklist of applications. Say, for example, a Dropbox. Contains blacklisted application. We'll keep it a very simple rule. If the system sees a blacklisted application on the device, we're going to do an instant notification, and we'll do an SMS message using some default templates that we've created. That'll happen instantaneously, okay? If after an hour, and again, this could be as long or short as you wish, we'll do another notification. In this case, we'll send an email, and let's go ahead and copy in info security. At the end of the day, if they still have not removed that application or basically put the device back into quote-unquote compliance based on the messages we've been sending them, let's go ahead and disallow their access to Exchange. So now they're no longer getting email. At the end of, and again, this might be a little bit drawn out for you. At the end of 2 days, if they still haven't changed that disposition, we'll go ahead and just do an enterprise wipe. So we'll delete all of the corporate apps, content, network access points off the device. I like this because it gives onus on the end users to correct behavior. It also helps educate them versus having something just instantly happen to their device, especially with BYOD. That's not appealing, right? So this a little bit different. What's great about this too is, as an administrator, these actions based on your policy happen automatically. So the system's doing the remediation for you. If at the second notification, I actually read the notification and I comply, the system snaps back business as usual. Nothing has to be done by the administrator. User's device is then, basically back to the way it should be in that managed state, working and operating the way that it should. And the administrator essentially gets a report at the end of the day that says, here are our top 10 violations, current disposition, and so forth. So pretty simple concept, but pretty compelling, especially when you start to think of hundreds to thousands of devices that might be under management. I will show you just a quick snapshot, and we do have kind of one that's a little bit more built out specifically for state and local, but this will give you a good concept. That multi-tenancy, so each one of these device groups essentially can have their own administrators or role-based access administrators. So we have some application folks, literally if you're an application management, that's basically your role. We can give you access to North America, this specific group of devices, and you would do all of the administrative stuff from an application standpoint. Same thing with content, et cetera. So a lot of granularity around deploying this maybe at the county level or the city level, but still having tenants that have their own look and feel, their own management capabilities. So I know we had a couple of folks that wanted to talk a little bit about applications. The one thing that I've seen kind of morph in the market is the conversation around apps. Has anyone last year developed applications that are already available, whether they're internal? Is everyone just starting to kind of get into that? Okay. So what I've gotten from customers essentially is there's two things. They're either just starting to develop apps, which I would say thumbs up on, and then there's folks that have developed apps last year and are now circling back around to try and find ways to secure those at a deeper level. That's when app wrapping comes into play, where if you do not want to redevelop that application, the ability to run it through an engine and embed lightweight code, so essentially you have additional authentication requirements, restrictions on cut and paste, Bluetooth enablement, things like that. We have that capability. The best practice for you, since most folks here are starting to develop apps, is really more of an SDK capability. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about that. For our app catalog, by the way, these are all internal apps that you can basically upload the IP or binary file, put all your metadata, it'll push out automatically to the devices you assign them to. Any of your public applications, so if you have recommended, whether they're Concur, expense management, or Salesforce, or whatever it is, literally just add application, look it up on the public market, and basically uploads the pointer to this console, and then you can provide any keywords and metadata, and then again assign those to specific devices. Apple Volume Purchase Program. Anyone partaking in volume purchase? Okay. So the format to which they provide you those codes and stuff, it's basically like a CSV file with activation codes and URLs. So if you think of managing hundreds of devices, therefore hundreds to potentially thousands of apps on essentially an Excel spreadsheet, it's not super appealing. So we can actually upload that into our system and do all of the negotiations of those applications to the devices through the console. Also do tracking for bill back, cost center management, things like that. So you can actually do all this stuff either auto or on demand, allocate it to maybe a select location group or user group in AD, and then also the system's smart enough to know that even though we've pushed the application out for on-demand download, it hasn't cached the code. So 30 days later, if we notice there were 50 specific users that actually didn't go through the download process, we can re-notify them. If they still don't download them, we can then pull them back and reissue them to someone else. So we don't cache it even though we've pushed out access. And I think it's a big differentiator. The application security story, like I said, is really morphed. Profiles, let's see, we'll get you into the SDK. I've heard everything from geofencing applications to being able to do VPN at the application level, which is interesting because I don't know when was the last time you actually logged out of an application? Usually you don't. You just kind of exit. It doesn't necessarily log you out. So different use cases. We've already started a vet as far as support. Again, app wrapping. We have this available for iOS and Android today. Build out application profiles. So you saw the profile section that I showed you earlier. It's very much the same concept on the application side. What I like about that is you don't necessarily have to pull the app back. If you change one thing, all you have to do is change that profile and just re-push the profile versus having to pull everything back, make that one edit, and then republish everything. So it's a little bit less intrusive. Let's look at, let's see here. So Android, we're on 1.0. Essentially, as we build it out, it'll look very much like iOS here in the next maybe 1 or 2 releases. By the way, we have a major release every 2.5 months. So really, really evolving fast. Again, that general tab flow, authentication requirements, being able to configure whether you want to have login access based on directory services, so username and password, so it's your AD credentials, for example. What I like that some people are starting to do is they'll require a passcode too. So you can actually create almost two-factor authentication within the application itself. So they've got to do directory services, credentials, and then they require a passcode, and you keep it really simple, a 4-digit passcode. After 30 minutes, someone's in an app, it pops up, they just have to put in that 4-digit numeric based on policy, and then kind of do an updated re-authentication. Grace period, locks, any restrictions that you essentially want to put on the application or the device that the application is located on. So allow in an offline mode viewing. So just a simple scenario. Say you want to give them access to view that app offline 5 times. Once they get to that 6th time they try to access, add a custom disposition. So you'll see within our console, everything has an automated action based on policy. So whether it's wipe an app, restrict access to that application, report it back to a server, or some type of custom disposition, we do all that heavy lifting up front so that when something happens based on policy, you're not living within the system. So require that this device be under management in order for the application to be viewed. Custom disposition, you'll get the gist of it as far as the flow. Prevent copy and paste. Disable printing. Control your open in. So I can say, okay, I only want open in specific applications so that you're controlling kind of where data essentially lives. Compliance checks, so jailbroker rooted. You may not want to have your application accessible on a device that's compromised in that sense. Branding. What I like about branding is you can create an application, say for example, for an event like today. If you have an event 3 months later where that application, the functionality is still useful, essentially you can reskin that application in minutes, and it basically looks like you redeveloped a completely new app. Same thing for different departments, right? You can create one application, make it useful across 3 or 4 different departments, but have different skins for each of those. Looks like you did a lot of work, but basically, again, reskin in just a few minutes. Analytics I like, so those application folks, what's cool about analytics is it gives you a full report on when you log into an app, what you look at, how long you click on something, or how many times you click in a specific area. Gives you forensics on how to better that application for the user. For the developers, we also have full access to logging. So this is a little bit more geared towards why is my application crashing, or certain things going wrong specifically within the application that I have to obviously develop or spend some time developing a fix for. So this gives you more of the overall performance of the application from a usability standpoint. Geofencing, the ability to create an inner, middle, and outer fence, and essentially say, based on those geographic locations, this is how I want that application to work from a disposition standpoint. In a separate part of the console, essentially, we can actually build those profiles which cover specific areas. Funny enough, we do work with a lot of global companies. It seems like there is a high demand for geofencing certain type of applications in China, which is interesting. So. Custom settings, that pretty much kind of gives you a high-level view as far as some of the things that we can do through our SDK library. This is a free functionality. It's part of our basic license. It's free. We work with a lot of app developers like MicroStrategy and some of these folks that are tinkering with Chevron, for example, embedding this. So essentially, if you have the system, you have more controls and security at the actual application level itself. And the last thing I'll show you here, and I'll just open it up for some questions, is the privacy settings, just so you know that they're there. Let's see here. Oops. And why I'm doing that, any specific questions that I can help you address? Yeah.
Content locker. Is it called content locker?
Yep. So content or documents that are on the device but not in the container itself? No, so it's from the container. Yeah, from within the container you can control open in, so essentially again lock it down to only viewing in the container itself. We've added, like I mentioned, you'll see desktop sync here. This is actually the self-service portal. So I've got a manage content section where I can actually add folders, share folders, and also upload content that shows up in my content locker here. We also have the ability to do things like shared links. Next phase for those is the ability to do things like smart links. So I can send something to you with an actual expiration date. I can also control whether or not you can forward that to somebody, et cetera. So. Yeah, so we can disable cut and paste, absolutely. You can actually set effective and expiration dates on documents, so it's only available, say, Monday through Friday. It auto-tees up, auto-deletes. Disable the ability to open it in a third-party app or save it on the device, offline, online viewing, printing, everything. Yep. You can also, expense management-wise, you can say, this is a large file. You will only allow you viewing and Wi-Fi only, so you're not crushing your data plan, you know, when you're trying to download something 3G, 4G. The expense management stuff ties into the compliance engine, so we can actually add voice data and SMS plans in there. We also have APIs to tie into more complex expense management tools, so we can kind of auto import those plans. But our focus on the TEM side is more prevent the accident versus describe it. So you can actually have alerts to the administrators or users as they get closer to those ceilings. And then essentially if it's 5%, you know, to that ceiling, we can pull back as much as we want from the device essentially and make it a paperweight so that you're not going over that, that threshold. Any other questions?
Yeah, in regards to content.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so with attachments, and you know, if we create the policy that says encrypt those, you can control full open-in, and essentially where we see if that is a use case, you can create the policies based on all attachments or certain types of attachments, and then basically lock it down so the only open-in capabilities in the content locker and then all those listed DLP capabilities are applicable. Yeah. Anything else, folks? I know that was a lot, so. Yeah.
There are other MDM, you know, technologies out there, that sort of thing. How does it compare with, you know, how do you make a decision?
How do you make a decision? So a lot of it has to do with mapping to use cases. Obviously, I'm biased, but the architecture scalability. So when you look at and I'll think of myself as a customer. I mean, architectural scalability, you know, depending on the number of devices that you have to support, it's got to scale pretty seamlessly. Ease of management, most folks I deal with are short-staffed. They don't want to live in a console. They've got 15 other projects essentially that they've got to move on to. So that automated capability is really a big differentiator for us. We are positioning ourselves to be a true provider of each of these components. So some out there obviously that do those a la carte, and that's their area of expertise. Where we're going essentially is being very mature in each of those product sets and providing you an all-inclusive platform. And I think that's a huge differentiator. So, you know, you'll think of your basic use cases, whether that's email and maybe some apps, you know, we've checked the box, and as it starts to migrate out to content and other things like that, it'll be a very mature product versus having to have 3 essentially different vendors kind of handling each. Pricing flexibility is a big one. So I mean, there's some pretty big advantages. I would say today our win rate versus our top 3 competitors is about 5 to 1. A lot of that has to do with the multi-tenancy and flexibility of the architecture itself. So, good question. Yeah.
Is your on-premise solution receive updates the same things that the hosted solution?
That's a really good question. So. The benefit of SaaS is essentially it's a hosted infrastructure, and you know when updates come out, we obviously notify, but you know those upgrades are kind of done for you. A lot of our bigger customers, so if you look at our DNA, the one thing to note is SaaS, we have a true SaaS infrastructure. It's the same code. There's no loss in feature functionality by going software as a service versus deploying on-premise. Big differentiator, but with on-premise you can actually control when those upgrades happen versus software as a service. And we also have 2 different flavors of software as a service. One is shared, which is a shared infrastructure, essentially less control on when those happen. We're notified, but it happens. And then we also have a dedicated, which is pretty much, you know, it's like on-premise, but we're hosting it for you. Essentially, you have full control on when when you get something, when you don't. I'd say one of the things I would highlight too is your users are tricky. They're going to find different ways to use these devices. So, you know, at the very beginning, I know we probably kind of glazed over the marketing flare as far as size and scalability, but the development spend, that size and scale really allows us. I was working with an account, they had two specific use cases, and no one could support them, but literally over the course of, I think it was 7 days, we had 17 developers actually put that into a hotfix in the next release. So that type of flexibility to actually create a different dynamic as far as the relationship, much more partnership oriented, much more innovative in that sense, kind of less vendor customer, I think is really unique to this market, and big reason why we win a lot of deals is just flexibility to support stuff that no one else is supporting. So, anything else? Absolutely. I think there's certain things from a canned profile perspective, at least in our trials, but for the most part, we really do a lot of sitting down with you and talking about that policy and basically building it into the system. But from a security perspective, I mean, we have tight integrations with, you know, like Samsung Knox, so we can do dual persona type stuff. We can put devices in kiosk mode or point of sale mode, which means in other scenarios, literally, I mean, you're almost skinning a device so they only have access to whatever apps you want them to, any specific network access point. So the security level really goes from one side to the other. It's really up to you. Yeah. Yep. Was that helpful? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.